You open your eyes to the muted light of a late Edo morning. The sliding paper doors, patched in places with mismatched scraps, let in a faint glow. Outside, you hear the clatter of a wooden bucket against the well, the murmured greetings of neighbors, and the distant cries of a vegetable seller making his rounds. You are a low-ranking samurai, technically part of the warrior class, but the days of battlefield glory are long gone. The Tokugawa peace has lasted for over 2 centuries, and your sword is now more ceremonial than practical. What sustains you is not conquest, but a stipend, paid in rice, your koku. The word koku sounds grand. 1 koku is supposed to be enough rice to feed 1 person for a year. But what arrives in your hands is not always rice itself. More often, you receive paper notes or rice equivalents, which you must exchange for money or barter. The stipend you get is exactly the same amount your grandfather once received, unchanged for generations. Even though the price of firewood, oil, vegetables, and cloth has risen steadily in Edo's busy markets, by the time you convert your allotment into something useful, it is already worth far less than its official measure. You know the number well. Your position in the domain determines how much you are allotted, and as one of the lowest-ranking retainers, your share is small. On paper, it is enough to live on. In reality, it is a figure that shrinks the moment it is handed to you. The rice is often taxed in quiet ways: deductions for the upkeep of the storehouse, ceremonial contributions, and the occasional loan your lord demands during times of domain debt. Some years, the rice is not given at all, replaced instead by a smaller amount of unstable paper currency. Merchants are wary of such notes. Some refuse them altogether, and a few openly question their authenticity. The day you collect your stipend, you walk to the storehouse with dozens of other men. The air inside smells dry, like husks and dust. Clerks sit at low desks with their brushes, recording names and amounts. Each retainer steps forward in turn, receives his measure or paper, and moves on. No speeches, no ceremony, only the transaction itself. You glance at the others. Some carry small scales to check the weight. Others mutter quietly about the allotment, seeming smaller this year. Everyone knows that nothing they say will change the ledger the clerks keep. By the time you reach home, the reality of what you carry has settled on your shoulders. The rice you receive today is not just food. It must cover clothing, household oil, firewood, paper, tools, and the small gifts expected when visiting superiors or attending seasonal festivals. Even the poorest samurai must present himself with some degree of refinement. A hakama patched at the knees must still be clean and presentable. Worn sandals must be replaced before attending official duties. The money for these small but constant expenses comes from the same shrinking pool. You think of the shame that comes when the rice runs low and millet or barley takes its place in the pot. Such grains are considered fit for peasants, not samurai, and yet they fill more and more of your meals in bad years. You eat with the same formality as always, but the taste tells you the truth. The status you were born into no longer protects you from the slow erosion of your living. In private moments, some of your fellow retainers speak of alternatives. A man you once trained with now tutors the sons of wealthy merchants in reading and calligraphy. Another has quietly taken work as a physician in a rural village, earning coin on the side. There are even whispers of those who have abandoned their posts entirely, moving to merchant towns where their past can be forgotten. But to leave is to give up the name you carry, the right to wear the sword, and the thin thread of honor that connects you to your ancestors. That night, lying on your thin futon, you count in your head how much rice remains, how many pieces of firewood are left for winter, how much is still owed to the pawn shop for last month's expenses. The stipend will not change next year. The prices will. You try to sleep, but the weight of your life is measured, grain by grain, in a currency that never grows. You wonder what happens to those who cannot keep the balance, whether they vanish quietly into the crowd, or whether their decline is noticed by no one at all. The year moves forward slowly, each season marked less by festivals or weather and more by the pace of your expenses. In the first months after receiving your stipend, the household feels almost comfortable. There is enough rice for full bowls, and the occasional purchase of better fish or fresh greens from the market seems harmless. But by the time the plum blossoms begin to fade, the arithmetic has shifted. What seemed plentiful is now clearly insufficient, and every decision is weighed against the months still ahead. You have learned, as many low-ranking samurai have, that survival requires quiet strategies, each one unspoken and hidden from the public eye. Officially, a man of your class is forbidden to engage in trade or manual labor. To work with one's hands, to bargain in the markets like a common merchant, is a mark of disgrace. Yet the rule is a fiction that most quietly ignore. In truth, the city is full of retainers who have found ways to supplement their income without attracting attention. Some teach literacy is not widespread, and many townspeople will pay to have their children taught the basics of reading, writing, and simple arithmetic. These lessons are often given discreetly in the home, under the pretense of guiding the sons of friends or acquaintances. Others turn to calligraphy or poetry, selling finely written scrolls, as though they were mere artistic gifts. A few men, skilled with their hands, carve wooden combs or make paper fans. Their work is passed through the stalls of sympathetic merchants who take a share of the profit. Your own household has developed its own system of quiet economies. Your wife mends not only your clothes, but also those of two neighboring families, paid not in coin, but in oil, firewood, or dried fish. A distant cousin in the countryside sends millet and sweet potatoes after the harvest in exchange for small packets of tea, which you can acquire cheaply through connections in the castle storehouses. You have even learned that a careful arrangement with a certain rice broker will allow you to borrow against next year's stipend at a modest interest though. Each time you do this, you know you are only tightening the cord around your future. In better years, there are small indulgences. A set of fresh sandals, bought before the summer processions, and a cup or two of better sake on the night of the autumn moon viewing. These moments are savored because they are rare and because they remind you, however briefly, of a time when you thought your life as a samurai would mean stability. Yet even these small luxuries carry risk. Spend too freely in one season, and the winter will be a time of bitter meals and cold rooms. The pawn shop is both a curse and a salvation. It is the place you go when there is no other choice, when a sudden expense arrives, or when the rice in the jar is running too low and the next stipend is still weeks away. The pawned items are always taken with the promise that they will be redeemed. A small lacquered box from your mother's dowry, a pair of finely made sandals, even the short wakizashi sword that completes your daisho. But redemption is not always possible. Many items that leave your home do not return. There are moments when you think about the invisible line you walk every day. On one side is the ideal of samurai life, loyalty, dignity, and restraint. On the other side is the constant need to make ends meet, to do what must be done to keep your family fed and your roof intact. Each year that passes, it becomes harder to believe the two can truly coexist. Your lord's household rarely acknowledges the strain of its lowest retainers. You are summoned for duties as always guard work at the castle gates, ceremonial appearances at festivals, and participation in processions to and from Edo. These tasks bring no extra pay, only extra costs. To stand at the gate in winter requires proper winter clothing. To walk in procession requires sandals that will not fall apart before the journey is done. The expense is yours alone. Still, there is a quiet pride in managing to endure. When you see another retainer who has fallen into ruin, his clothes frayed beyond respectability, his debts whispered about by others, you feel both pity and a grim sense of relief. That is not you. Not yet. But each night, as you sit by the small lamp and calculate the weeks left until the next allotment, you cannot escape the thought that survival is a skill, not a guarantee. You begin to wonder whether this skill will pass on to your children, or whether they will inherit only the burden of your class without the means to sustain it. The future is a narrow path, and you walk it one grain of rice at a time. The last weeks before stipend day are the hardest. Each morning begins with a quiet assessment of what remains. The level of rice in the jar, the dwindling pile of firewood, and the coins hidden in a small pouch that seems lighter every time you touch it. Meals become simpler millet, stretched with pickled radish. Thin soup flavored only by miso, and a single small fish divided between 3 people. The effort to appear untroubled grows heavier than the hunger itself. You rise early on the day the allotment is due. The air is still cold, and the frost has left pale traces along the edges of the street. There is no ceremony, no festive spirit. The line outside the storehouse is longer than usual. Men stand quietly, each with his own thoughts, hands tucked into sleeves for warmth. You nod to a few familiar faces. They nod back. No one speaks of the debts they will pay today or the items they will retrieve from the pawn shop. No one mentions the merchants who will be waiting at the corners, ready to offer instant coin for those who cannot carry or store their rice. When your name is called, you step forward, bow, and take what is given. It feels lighter than last year. You don't weigh it. There is no point. The clerk's brush has already decided the number. You bow again and step away, balancing the sacks as you make your way home. The sound of the grains shifting inside is oddly reassuring, even if you know they will begin to disappear almost immediately. Your wife meets you at the door. Together, you carry the rice inside and measure out a portion for storage. Another portion is set aside for repayment of what you owe. By the end of the day, what remains for the household is smaller than you would like, but enough to see you through for now. The cycle has begun again. The years pass in this rhythm: receipt, rationing, repayment, and slow depletion. You notice changes in the neighborhood. A few houses are shuttered, their families gone. Others are newly occupied by men you do not recognize, retainers from other domains who have come to Edo for service. Some keep to themselves. Others speak freely of the difficulty of living on their stipends, as if sharing the weight might somehow lessen it. One evening, you hear that an old acquaintance has left the service entirely. No ceremony, no formal resignation. He simply disappeared. The story is that he took a post with a wealthy merchant as a guard, living above the shop in exchange for food, clothing, and a modest wage. It is not an honorable end to a samurai career, but it is not the worst fate either. You think of him sometimes and wonder if he sleeps more easily than you do. The truth is that survival for a lower-ranking samurai is not a matter of skill with the sword, or loyalty, or even cleverness. It is a matter of endurance. Year after year, you adjust to less, accept what cannot be changed, and find ways to stretch the little you are given. The pride you carry is not in wealth or influence, but in having endured another cycle without falling into open ruin. Still, you wonder quietly, privately, whether this is survival in any true sense or merely the slow wearing down of a life until nothing remains but the name. In the stillness of the night, with the lamp burning low and the rice jar nearly empty, you ask yourself a question that has no easy answer. How long can a life be lived on honor alone? The sun is not yet above the tiled rooftops when you rise. The air inside the house is cool, and the floorboards creak softly under your feet. You tie your hakama with careful knots, check the tie of your top knot in the dim reflection of a lacquered tray, and step into the street. The day's duty awaits, and though it will be long, it will not be glorious. As a lower-ranking samurai, much of your life is spent in service that is both necessary and invisible. Guard posts must be manned, documents must be copied, and messages must be carried between offices. These are not the tasks of the battlefield, but of a bureaucracy that keeps the domain running in the long peace of the Tokugawa era. The romantic image of the warrior is something you carry in your clothing and your swords, not in the work you do. You report first to the gate, where a small group of other retainers has already gathered. The guardhouse smells faintly of old tatami mats and the smoke from the brazier kept in the corner. The shift begins with a formal check of weapons and names. Two men take their posts at the outer gate. Two more stand just inside the inner threshold, while the rest wait in rotation. Most of the time, nothing happens. You stand still, bow to those who enter, answer questions from passing officials, and keep your eyes fixed on the street beyond. Hours pass in this way, your legs growing stiff, your mind wandering, When your turn in the rotation ends, you are sent to the records office. Here, the work is quieter, but no less tedious. Bundles of documents are stacked in neat piles on low desks. The senior clerk hands you a sheaf of petitions and reports to be The ink is faint in places, the brushstrokes worn by time, and your task is to reproduce them exactly, every mark, every signature, even the mistakes. This is not work that requires a warrior's training, but it requires patience, and mistakes are noticed. By midday, you are permitted to take your meal. The guardhouse provides no food, so you bring your own. A small lacquered box with rice, a few slices of pickled daikon, and perhaps a scrap of grilled fish, if the household could spare it. You eat quickly, sitting on the edge of the veranda, watching the movement in the street. Merchants pass with their carts, laborers carry loads of timber, and groups of children run between the shops. The life beyond the gate moves quickly, filled with the business of trade and work, while you return to your post. In the afternoon, you are sent to deliver a message to another part of the castle complex. The distance is not far, but each delivery is done in full form, proper bowing when the message is handed over, waiting for acknowledgement, and returning to report that the task is complete. It is a chain of motions that could be completed in moments, but is stretched by formality into an hour. Some days, your duties extend beyond the castle walls. You might be assigned to accompany a higher-ranking official through the streets or to carry orders to a village within the domain. These trips are both a welcome change and an added cost. New sandals must be bought if the road is long, and the small expenses of travel are rarely reimbursed. By the time the evening bell sounds, you have completed the day's assigned duties. You bow to your superior, make the short walk home, and feel the weight of the day settle on your shoulders. There is no sense of accomplishment, no clear result from your work, only the knowledge that you have fulfilled the expectations of your station for another day. Tomorrow will be much the same. The tasks may vary slightly, perhaps more time at the gate, perhaps an extra delivery, or an afternoon spent copying ledgers, but the pattern will repeat. Service without battle, duty without reward, the endless maintenance of a system that does not change. The pay is fixed, the hours are long, and the work is unremarkable. Yet it is what keeps the domain moving, and it is what is expected of you. As you sit in your small room that night, removing your sandals and folding your hakama, you think of how little of a samurai's life is spent in the way you once imagined. The stories told in youth are of courage and decisive moments. The reality is long hours, quiet obedience, and the ability to endure boredom without complaint. This is the duty of a low-ranking samurai, and it is a duty without end. The bell that marks the start of duty echoes through the narrow streets before the sun is high. You rise, adjust your clothing, and make the short walk to the castle gates once again. The familiarity of the route does not make it easier. Each step is a reminder of the long hours ahead. Hours that will be spent not in decision or action, but in quiet attendance to the routines that govern the domain. This morning, you are assigned to an inner gate post. The space is smaller than the main entrance and shaded by the heavy roof tiles. The air is cooler here, but the stillness can be stifling. You stand with another retainer, exchanging the occasional quiet word, careful not to be overheard. Every bow to a passing official must be deep enough to show respect, yet not so slow as to draw attention. You hold your posture until your shoulders ache. The midday change of assignment brings you to a waiting room outside a council chamber. Your task is to be present, nothing more. You sit on the edge of a cushion, listening to the muffled voices beyond the sliding doors. The conversation is not for your ears, but you cannot avoid hearing fragments, disputes about land boundaries, requests for tax relief, and decisions about festival expenditures. All of it must be kept to yourself. The hours pass with only the occasional need to rise and carry a message to another part of the building. By late afternoon, you are called to assist with preparations for a procession. The Lord will travel to a nearby shrine in a few days, and each step of the journey must be planned. You and several others are sent to walk the intended route, noting any obstacles or repairs that might be needed. You count the number of bridges, measure the width of certain streets, and mark where attendants will stand during the passage. None of this requires the use of a sword, but all of it must be done exactly when you return. The light is already beginning to fade. You deliver your notes to the official in charge, Bo, and are dismissed. The evening bell sounds, and the streets are filled with the smell of cooking fires. You pass a shop where a merchant is closing his shutters for the night, his ledger under one arm. His day has been full of bargaining, movement, and the exchange of goods. Yours has been full of standing, bowing, and carrying messages. Some nights you are summoned again after returning home. An unexpected visitor to the Lord's residence might require an additional guard, or a document might need to be delivered before morning. You respond without question, because to refuse is unthinkable. Your life is not your own in these matters. Your time belongs to your Lord. It is in these moments, walking through the quiet streets with a sealed envelope in your hand, that you realize how much of your life is consumed by formality. Every task is shaped by the way you address others, the way you carry yourself, and the order in which things are done. The work is rarely difficult, but it is constant, and it leaves little room for anything else. Friendships are maintained in brief exchanges at the guardhouse or in the corridors. Family life is fitted into the hours before dawn and after dark. There are no days off, only days when your duties are lighter. Even in sleep, you remain alert to the possibility of being called. The thought of escape a day spent away from the walls and duties is a luxury you can rarely imagine, let alone attempt. The pay for such work never changes, just as it never matched the effort required. You endure, because endurance is the unspoken skill of the low-ranking samurai. The system is not designed to reward you, but to keep you in place, bound by obligation. And so you rise each morning, walk to your post, and offer your service, knowing that tomorrow you will do it all again. The morning begins with a thin mist clinging to the castle walls. You arrive at your post, as always, bowing to the senior retainer before taking your place at the gate. The hours pass slowly, marked only by the sound of sandals on the stone path and the distant clatter of carts in the town beyond. You have been here so many mornings that the scene feels more like memory than reality. The same boards underfoot, the same grain in the wood of the gate, the same faces passing in and out. There was a time when you thought this service might lead to something more. A special assignment, perhaps, or a recommendation from a superior that could bring promotion. Years ago, you carried out your duties with an alertness born from hope, looking for moments to prove yourself. But those moments never came. The work is structured so that the lower ranks are always interchangeable. You are not valued for your individual skill, but for your ability to be present, obedient, and unremarkable. The sense of stagnation seeps into everything. You notice it in the way your back stiffens, not from readiness, but from standing too long in the same place. You feel it when your brush moves across the page in the records office, copying the same names and titles you copied the year before. The repetition dulls the mind until the days blur together. In rare moments of conversation with other retainers, you hear similar thoughts. One speaks of wanting to study medicine, another of the idea of teaching in a village far away from the domain. Yet these are just words. None of you act on them. To leave would mean stepping outside the structure that defines you, and without it, who would you be? Occasionally, you see higher-ranking officials pass through the gate, their movements brisk, their expressions set. They are bound by the same system, but their duties take them beyond these walls to councils, to negotiations, to ceremonial audiences. You imagine they, too, must feel the weight of endless obligations. But their positions give them at least the illusion of purpose. For you, the purpose is harder to see. The years accumulate quietly. The young men who joined service after you now stand beside you at the gate. Just as you once stood beside older men when you began, you catch yourself repeating the same small instructions they once gave you: how to bow at the right angle, how to hold a message when delivering it, and how to keep your expression calm when confronted with an impatient official. You are not training replacements so much as ensuring that the pattern continues. In the stillness of another evening watch, you begin to understand that this is the point. The system is not meant to change, and neither are you. It is designed to keep every part in place, moving smoothly in the same slow rhythm, so that the order of things remains unshaken. Your life is a link in a chain that stretches backward through the decades and will stretch forward beyond your own time, unaltered. As you walk home under the dim lanterns, you realize that your ambition has faded without you noticing. What remains is not dissatisfaction, but a kind of acceptance. You may never rise beyond this post, but you have learned to endure it. The duty has become its own identity, and the routine its own reward. The low-ranking samurai does not live for glory. He lives for continuity, for the quiet satisfaction of fulfilling the role assigned to him until the end. When you picture a samurai's meal, you might imagine steaming bowls of white rice, fresh fish, and delicacies from the market. That is true for high-ranking warriors and wealthy households. But for a lower-ranked samurai, such a table was a rare sight. Most days, your diet consisted of millet, a small, hearty grain, yellow-brown in color, far coarser than the refined white rice eaten by your superiors. Millet was cheap, easy to store, and far less desirable, which made it perfectly suited for the frugal life you lived. Every morning began with the same sound, the faint crackle of millet boiling in the pot, mixed with the smell of miso soup, thin enough to see the bottom of the bowl. The soup might have a sliver of daikon radish if the season was right, or perhaps a single dried sardine to give it flavor. If you were lucky, your wife or mother had saved a small piece of tofu from the market, soft, pale, and worth savoring slowly. Pickles were not a side dish so much as a necessity. They kept through the winter, they added salt to your diet, and they made plain millet easier to swallow. Most were made at home. Cucumbers pressed under heavy stones, eggplants soaked in miso, and daikon radish buried in rice bran until it became pungent enough to flavor the blandest grain. Every household had its own methods, and you could tell where a man came from by the taste of his pickles. White rice was a symbol of celebration on New Year's Day, during festivals, or after a rare bonus from your lord. A pot of polished rice might appear on the table. The first mouthful was always eaten in silence, as if to honor the occasion. You could feel the difference on your tongue, immediately soft, sticky, with a faint sweetness absent in millet. For a few minutes, you felt like the higher-ranking retainers, whose lives seemed distant from your own. But by the next morning, the millet would be back. Protein came sparingly. Meat was rare in most of Edo, Japan, not entirely absent, but certainly not common in your class. When you did eat animal protein, it was often dried fish, tiny river shrimp, or scraps left over from wealthier households. Eggs were a treat. You might buy one at the market to stir into soup for a sick family member, or save a few coins to enjoy one yourself after a long stretch of austerity. Tea was another quiet luxury. Even poor samurai tried to keep some leaves in the house, stored carefully to prevent moisture. A small pot of green tea could turn a sparse meal into something comforting, especially in winter. Yet even tea leaves were often reused, brewed once for guests, then boiled again for the family. The second pot was weaker, but it still warmed you. Your relationship with food became one of discipline. Waste was unthinkably. Grain was eaten, every pickle brine reused until it turned cloudy and exhausted. Leftovers were folded into the next meal without question. Millet from the morning might become rice gruel by evening, stretched with water to feed more mouths. If a fish bone remained after supper, it might be boiled again to flavor tomorrow's miso. Meals were not only about survival, they carried the weight of status. No matter how poor, a samurai was expected to present his food with dignity. A chipped bowl was repaired or replaced before it was placed before a guest. The table was set neatly, even if all you had to offer was millet and pickles. Pride was served alongside every dish, for in a society bound by a hierarchy, appearance mattered almost as much as reality. And so, you learned to live within these limits. You discovered that the slow chew of millet could be satisfying when eaten in silence, that a pickle's sour bite could cut through the monotony, and that tea when weak could lift the spirit. In the art of frugality, Survival was not only about what you ate, but also about how you accepted what you ate. Yet one question always lingered. In a world where status defined worth, how long could a samurai's pride endure on such humble meals? Frugality, for a low-ranking samurai, was not simply a matter of eating modest meals. It was the central philosophy guiding the entire household. Your stipend, modest to the point of insult, had to stretch across food, clothing, tools, taxes, and unexpected expenses. Each moment you spent was measured carefully, and mistakes could ripple through the months ahead like cracks in a teacup. The household ledger, a bound notebook of bamboo paper, was the silent witness to your life. Every entry was written with deliberate brushstrokes. The cost of a bundle of millet, the price of miso, the rare indulgence of lamp oil in the winter. Your wife, who often managed the home's accounts, recorded each purchase with neat precision, sometimes adding a note in the margin. Too expensive this month, or better quality from the South Market. The ink told the story of both restraint and longing. Clothing was among the most carefully managed expenses. A new kimono was out of the question for most years. Instead, garments were patched, re-dyed, and altered until the fabric itself seemed to remember every stage of your life. Indigo was the most common dye, affordable and durable, and its deep blue became the unofficial color of frugality. When a sleeve frayed, it was not thrown away, but reinforced with a patch, the stitches small and neat enough to blend with the cloth. Your sandals, made of straw, were mended so many times that the sole became a mosaic of repairs. Lighting was another area of economy. Candles were costly, and lamp oil was not to be wasted. At night, the household moved together into one room to share the light, working or talking until the wick burned low. Once darkness claimed the corners, the day ended. In winter, darkness came early, and so did sleep, not out of choice, but to save oil. The rhythm of life bent itself around these small necessities. When shortages came, and they often did, the household relied on the silent economy of favors. A neighbor might lend you a pot of miso in exchange for a promise of firewood next month. A distant cousin could send a bundle of dried persimmons after the autumn harvest, and you, in turn, might pass them to another friend in need. It was a web of mutual survival, delicate yet essential. Seasonal change offered both relief and challenge. Spring brought fresh greens that could be gathered without costly young bamboo shoots, wild herbs, and edible leaves from the hillsides. Summer offered fish from the rivers, though only if you had time to catch them. Autumn was the season of abundance, when markets overflowed with vegetables and grains, and preserving food became a family effort. Winter, however, tested every store and habit. Pickles and dried foods dominated the table, and the taste of fresh produce became a memory. Children learned these lessons early. A child in a samurai household knew not to ask for sweets outside of festivals, and even then, such treats were rare. They grew up understanding that every object had a place and a purpose, and that nothing from a wooden spoon to a scrap of cloth was without value. In this way, frugality was not only an economic practice, but also a moral one, a reflection of the virtues expected from those who served their lord. And yet, no matter how tightly the ledger was balanced, there was always the shadow of debt, a sudden illness, a broken tool, a request from your superior for a gift. These could unravel months of careful saving. Many low-ranking samurai lived with the quiet knowledge that they were only one misfortune away from borrowing money, a step that could lead to years of repayment and humiliation. Frugality was a skill, but it was also a burden. It kept you alive, yet it tethered your life to limits that could not be escaped. Each day you asked yourself, was this economy a mark of discipline or a slow erosion of the samurai's dignity? Frugality, for a low-ranking samurai, was more than just a way to survive, was a shield to protect your dignity in a society where appearances carried weight equal to skill. A patched kimono could speak of care and discipline if worn with pride. An empty rice bin could be masked by an air of calm detachment. The art was in making poverty invisible, or at least respectable. Your honor was tied to your ability to maintain a certain standard of life, even when the numbers in your household ledger told another story. The tea ceremony, for example, was a social duty that could not be abandoned. You might serve your guests tea from chipped cups, but you would arrange them with such precision and grace that no one would remark on their age. When entertaining higher-ranking samurai, you would use your best seasonal sweets, perhaps bought on credit, knowing that to appear careless in hospitality was to invite whispers. There was also a subtle hierarchy in frugality itself. The ability to stretch a stipend without complaint was respected. It showed loyalty, self-control, and resourcefulness. A samurai who flaunted wealth risked seeming reckless or vain. One who appeared perpetually desperate risked seeming incompetent. The balance between thrift and honor was as delicate as the blade you wore. The women of the household played a quiet but decisive role in this balance. Wives and mothers managed supplies with remarkable skill, sometimes spinning scraps of silk into enough thread to mend a lord's discarded robe into a garment for their own children. Their frugality was often invisible to outsiders. Yet it was the reason the household could still afford incense for the Buddhist altar or paper for the seasonal greetings that maintained social ties. Some samurai developed personal strategies to maintain dignity while living with so little. One might practice the art of kintsugi, repairing cracked bowls with lacquer and powdered gold, turning flaws into beauty, a philosophy that mirrored their own patched lives. Another might cultivate a small garden in the courtyard, not only for food, but also to display an image of self-sufficiency. Others invested in a single high-quality item, such as a fine writing brush or a well-kept sword, as a visible symbol of their worth, even if the rest of their life was frayed. The philosophy of Bushido loyalty, honor, and discipline gave spiritual weight to this frugality. Living simply was framed as a virtue, a way to keep the mind unclouded by greed. But reality was less poetic. Hunger gnawed at the stomach. The cold seeped into the bones during winter nights when the fire was allowed to burn only a few hours. Pride did not always warm the hands or fill the bowl. Still, some samurai found satisfaction in small victories, an extra measure of rice saved for a festival, a debt repaid early, a robe so well mended that it fooled even a keen eye. These moments, though modest, were celebrated quietly, perhaps with an extra cup of tea or a visit to the temple to offer thanks. Yet the question lingered. Was this life of restraint truly honorable? Or was it a slow surrender to the system that kept low-ranking samurai in their place? Frugality allowed survival, but it also ensured that survival never rose into prosperity. In the stillness of night, ledger balanced and lamps extinguished, you might ask yourself whether you were preserving your pride or simply protecting an illusion. The sun had long set over Edo's tiled rooftops, and the city's bustling streets transformed into narrow corridors of darkness. By law, commoners shuttered their homes early, and oil lamps flickered faintly in the night air. For you, a low-ranking samurai, this was the beginning of your duty as part of the Yuriki and Dorshin-assisted guard rotations. The night watch, your post was hardly glamorous. You were assigned to a gate near the outskirts of a merchant district where travelers, errand boys, and sometimes questionable figures slipped through during the late hours. In theory, you were there to keep order. In reality, your job was as much about being seen as it was about seeing. Your presence reassured some and deterred others, but more importantly, it reminded the townspeople that the shogunate's eyes never truly closed. Your equipment was simple: a spear or naginata, a short sword, and a wooden lantern with paper sides. The lantern was not only to light your way, but also to signal your presence and, in certain situations, to signal to others. An extra long pause of your lantern's sway, for example, might be recognized by another guard as a warning without a word being spoken. The real complexity of the night watch wasn't in catching thieves or patrolling the gates. It was in navigating the web of unspoken politics between guards, merchants, and townspeople. Some shopkeepers quietly offered rice balls or coins to patrols who would look the other way if certain curfew rules were stretched. A poorly timed refusal could make you enemies. A poorly timed acceptance could ruin your career. The shogunate's officials expected loyalty, but they also turned a blind eye to certain transactions, as long as they weren't too obvious. Other dangers were less visible, but equally real. Rival guard posts could undermine you, spreading quiet rumors about your competence or loyalty. If you were from a lesser-known samurai family, you were more vulnerable to such attacks. One small incident, a missing purse, a fight you failed to break up could be inflated into a political scandal. If the wrong people wanted you gone, the townspeople themselves were masters of reading the guards. They knew who was strict, who could be bribed, and who simply wanted the shift to end without trouble. As a low-ranking samurai, you learned quickly that power didn't always flow from the top down. Sometimes it moved sideways, in favors and whispered exchanges between those who walked the same streets at night. Even within your own patrol group, there was a hierarchy. Senior guards took the warmer posts near tea houses or inns. Juniors like you were sent to the windy gates or lonely alleys. Any mistake you made was likely to be remembered, not forgiven. The way you walked your beat, the way you greeted fellow samurai, even the way you adjusted your sword in its scabbard, all of it was noted, silently judged, and quietly discussed in places you would never hear. On a cold night, you might find yourself staring at the glow of your lantern on the cobblestones, wondering whether the greater danger came from thieves or from the very people you worked alongside. And as the distant sound of a temple bell drifted through the air, you knew that every step you took under that dim light was being watched. Even if you could not see the eyes, the following night began much like any other. Cold air seeping through your layered robes, the faint scent of burning pine resin drifting from a nearby incense stall, and the slow, deliberate swing of your lantern. Yet tonight felt different. The streets were quieter than usual, as though some unspoken tension had settled over the district. You met with two fellow guards at the western checkpoint before beginning your patrol. They exchanged minimal words with you, their voices low and their eyes scanning the street even while speaking. That was never a good sign. In Ito's night watch, silence could mean many things: secrecy, or the subtle exclusion that preceded something important. It didn't take long for you to sense the shape of that something. A senior guard, Takamura, walked his beat unusually slowly that evening, pausing often in shadowed doorways. Takamura had served for over a decade, and his lantern light was known to signal more than just a safe street. It was said that when a merchant wanted discreet protection or a rival's goods misplaced, it was Takamura's hand you shook. You caught him giving a quick nod to a man in a wide-brimmed straw hat, who passed him a small paper-wrapped bundle no bigger than a fist. The exchange was subtle enough that anyone not looking directly would have missed it, but you were looking, and Takamura saw you looking. Later, when your patrol paths crossed again, he stepped in close, letting the lantern's glow fall between you. "Cold night, isn't it?" he said in a voice just above a whisper. "Some nights are colder than others. Sometimes you keep warm by holding on to certain things, or certain friends." The words were vague, but the meaning was sharp. You had seen something, and now you had a choice. The dilemma was more complicated than simple honesty. Reporting Takamura could earn you praise from certain superiors, but it could also mark you as a man who couldn't be trusted by his peers, the sort who disrupted the unspoken balance that kept the night watch running. On the other hand, staying silent might tie you to whatever game he was playing, whether you wanted to be part of it or not. Adding to the unease, a Yoriki, higher-ranking samurai officer, visited the western checkpoint that night. His questions were casual, asking about merchant traffic, weather, and even the quality of the oil in your lanterns, but you could tell he was looking for something beneath the surface. You wondered if he already knew about Takamura, and whether he was waiting to see if you would speak. As the hours passed, the air seemed to grow heavier. You thought about your family's modest stipend, your position's fragility, and the invisible threads that tied survival to discretion. It was not the thieves, drunkards, or wandering gamblers that posed the greatest danger to you tonight. It was the choice between speaking and staying silent, between being remembered as loyal to the law or loyal to the men who kept the streets under their own quiet order. By the time the shift ended, you had said nothing. But as you returned your lantern to the guardhouse rack, you noticed Takamura watching you from across the room. His eyes neither hostile nor friendly, but full of calculation. Whatever you had chosen, the game had only begun. The third night after the exchange, the lantern felt heavier in your hand, not because the oil was any different, but because every swing of its light reminded you that someone was watching you, not just Takamura, but the unseen eyes behind him. The streets of Edo were never truly still. Even in the early hours before dawn, you could hear the faint clatter of a late-arriving delivery cart, the muted laughter from a tea house where the sake had flowed too long, or the hollow thump of Geta sandals on the planks of a footbridge. But tonight, every sound seemed sharper, carrying with it the possibility of meaning. Halfway through your patrol, you saw Takamura again. He didn't approach this time. Instead, he lingered in the shadows at the corner of an alley, speaking with a man whose silk howry was far too fine for the hour. The conversation was brief. The stranger walked away quickly, his footsteps fading into the night. When you turned the corner, Takamura gave you a look that could have meant anything: warning, trust, or even an invitation. He didn't speak, but you noticed his hand resting on the cord of his lantern in a deliberate way. In the watch, this could mean meet me later. Later came sooner than you expected. As you stopped near the Kanda River to adjust a wick in your lantern, Takamura appeared at your side without a sound. "You're new enough to the watch," he began quietly, "that you might think this job is about catching thieves and keeping streets quiet. It's not. It's about knowing who walks the streets and when to look away." He spoke of merchants who paid for protection against petty criminals, of officials who preferred certain reports to be lost in the shuffle, and of a network of favors that could keep a man safe long after he'd put down his lantern for good. His words were neither confession nor threat. They were an offer. "You can walk the night alone," he said, "or you can walk it with people who'll keep your back covered." Before you could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted. Two Yoriki officers emerged from the dark, their lanterns brighter, their crests unmistakable. They addressed you both by name, their tone formal but edged with suspicion. "We've received reports of irregular activity on this patrol route," one said. "We'll be watching closely." It was a warning to Takamura and perhaps to you as well. The two men moved on, their light shrinking into the distance. You stood there in the cold, the faint ripple of the river at your feet, Takamura beside you, waiting for your answer. The choice was now unavoidable. Side with the official order and risk alienating the men you worked with every night, or join Takamura's quiet web of protection and power, knowing it might pull you into matters you could never officially admit to. Your lantern swayed gently, casting shadows on the water. You realized then that in the night watch, survival wasn't about strength or speed. It was about knowing which shadows to step into and which to leave alone. Reflection. Edo's night watch was more than a security force. It was a network where politics, protection, and personal loyalty intertwined in ways the city's daylight order never officially recognized. For low-ranking samurai, survival often depended less on the sword at your side and more on the alliances you built and the secrets you kept. In a city where the walls had ears, the real power was often found in knowing when not to speak. Imagine standing in your small, drafty Edo period home in the early morning, the faint smell of smoke from last night's charcoal brazier still lingering in the air. Outside, the city is waking, the sound of merchants rolling their wooden carts echoing through narrow streets. You are a samurai, but not the kind people imagine from ballads or kabuki plays. Your hair is tied neatly in the Chorin mage style. You carry a short sword at your side, and your family name carries some respect. But your purse, it is thin, far thinner than honor is supposed to allow. In the Tokugawa era, many samurai received stipends in rice, measured in koku-1, koku being the amount needed to feed a man for a year. Sounds generous until you realize the daimyo's retainers higher up the chain receive hundreds or even thousands of koku. You, as a low-ranking samurai, might receive 30 to 50 koku, enough to feed your family, perhaps, but not enough to maintain the appearance of refined living expected of your class. And appearances were everything. You could not be seen in threadbare robes or with a dull blade. No matter how little money you had, your sandals must be replaced before they crack. Your home must be swept and kept presentable. and your family must show dignity in every public interaction. So you begin your month the same way every month, converting part of your rice stipend into coins at the local rice broker. But the broker's rates are never in your favor. He knows you have no choice. A few strings of copper coins later, you're already doing arithmetic in your head. Charcoal for the brazier through the winter, salted fish for protein, cloth for repairs on your wife's kimono, and, if possible, a small sum kept aside in case your sword needs rewrapping or your eldest child falls ill. Your wife stretches every coin, bartering with vegetable sellers and mending clothes until the stitches themselves begin to fray. Still, there are days when your family's meals are little more than rice gruel flavored with a scrap of pickled radish. What makes it harder is the quiet shame of it. You walk past wealthier samurai on the way to your lord's estate, their sleeves of fine silk brushing against yours, their sandals lacquered, their swords gleaming. You bow as required, hiding the knowledge that the lacquer on your scabbard is cracked beneath the cloth wrapping you tied to conceal it. And yet, honor binds you. A samurai must never beg, never show resentment to his superiors, and never let the public see the strain behind the mask. Your service is not paid in comfort, but in the preservation of your family's place in the rigid order of society. Every month is a balancing act between necessity and dignity, between the hunger in your belly and the pride in your heart. But as the stipend dwindles and the days stretch on, you can't help but wonder, is it possible to uphold samurai honor when the purse is this light? You rise before dawn, because time is a resource you can control when money is scarce. While the wealthier samurai might enjoy a slow morning, you are already tending to quiet tasks that keep your household from slipping further into debt. Low-rank samurai had to live in two worlds at once, the visible world of status and honor, and the invisible world of survival. In the public eye, you were a retainer of the daimyo, bound by loyalty and the Bushido code. In private, you were part bookkeeper, part tradesman, and part silent gambler with fate. The discreet side jobs, though officially discouraged him, sometimes outright forbidden. Many low-ranking samurai found subtle ways to earn extra income. Some took up calligraphy commissions, writing elegant letters or copying official documents for townspeople willing to pay a few coins. Others, skilled in martial arts, offered private lessons to the children of merchants who wanted their sons to carry themselves like warriors. You, too, might find yourself teaching a merchant's boy the basics of sword handling, not the killing strikes, of course, but the stances, the grip, and the discipline. Payment often came not in coins, but in goods. A bundle of dried seaweed, a small barrel of miso, or a sack of millet. These arrangements were always discreet. If your superiors knew, they might see it as lowering the dignity of your position. Yet without them, the rice in your storeroom would run out by the 25th day of the month. The pawn shop and the rice broker, when all else failed. There was the pawn shop. A family sword might be unthinkable. The pawn butt, the extra short blade, the ornate teacup set gifted by a distant relative, or even a silk obi that your wife could spare for a month, these were negotiable. The pawn shop gave you coins quickly, but the repayment terms were steep. You would need to redeem the item before the due date, or risk losing it forever. Many a samurai's home was slowly stripped of its heirlooms, not by theft, but by the slow, deliberate pull of debt. Rice brokers, too, were a double-edged sword. Selling part of your stipend early meant immediate money, but it also left less rice for the months ahead, creating a cycle that was nearly impossible to escape. Saving face, perhaps the most important survival skill, wasn't managing money at all, it was managing appearances. You learned to patch robes in places that didn't show. You polished your sword's fittings so the cracks in the lacquer were harder to see. Your wife might re-dye a faded kimono to disguise the wear. Meals became a performance. When guests came, you served the best food you had, even if it meant you would eat plain rice the next day. In Edo society, a samurai could survive poverty, but not the loss of dignity. Still, no matter how carefully you planned, each month seemed to end the same way, with an empty coin purse, a dwindling rice jar, and a silent prayer that next month might somehow be easier. But as you pass through the castle gates each morning, standing among other retainers whose finances are just as strained, you wonder, is this quiet struggle truly sustainable, or is something bound to give way? The years pass in a quiet, unremarkable rhythm. Each month, the rice stipend arrives, debts are paid, and the coins are gone almost before you can count them. You have learned to stretch meals, patch worn clothing, and keep your sword polished even if the scabbard is old and frayed. This is the reality for most low-ranking samurai in your domain, though few speak of it openly. Poverty is not just about food and clothing, it changes the very role you play. Without enough money for new armor, you rely on old, repaired pieces, mismatched but serviceable. Without funds for proper training, the art of the sword becomes more symbolic than practical. The duties you imagined as a warrior guarding gates, patrolling roads are replaced by clerical work, record keeping, grain storage, supervision, and mediating small disputes between farmers. The desk slowly replaces the battlefield, and the identity of the samurai shifts into something quieter and less heroic. In the city, you notice another uncomfortable change. The lines between social classes begin to blur. Merchants, long considered beneath samurai in status, live in larger homes, wear finer silk, and wield influence in ways that would have been unthinkable in earlier times. Some samurai quietly marry into merchant families to secure stability. Others invest discreetly in small businesses, perhaps a tea shop or a sake stall hidden under relatives' names. Survival requires flexibility, and the code of honor bends in small, unspoken ways. Ironically, the decline in wealth brings a flowering of culture. Low-ranking samurai with fewer official duties turn to poetry, painting, calligraphy, or the tea ceremony. Some even dabble in theater or foreign studies, though always discreetly. A neighbor carves intricate netsuke, tiny toggles for kimono sashes, and sells them to wealthy townspeople. It is unofficial work, frowned upon by tradition, yet his craftsmanship finds its way into the homes of Edo's elite. By the mid-19th century, the financial strain on the samurai class is nearly universal. Even many daimyos are deep in debt, relying on the very merchants they once considered inferior. When the Meiji Restoration comes in 1868 and the samurai system is dissolved, it feels less like a sudden collapse and more like the final acknowledgement of what had been true for decades. For the lowest ranks, the romantic image of the armored warrior had long since faded. The sword at your side is no longer a tool of battle, but a symbol of a role that has quietly transformed. You have survived not through acts of war, but through quiet persistence, enduring each month, each year, with the unglamorous skill of making too little stretch just far enough. And perhaps that was the truest kind of survival after all. The morning mist clings to the river as you walk along the narrow embankment, your sandals damp from the dew. The fishing village is quiet at this hour, save for the gentle creak of wooden boats shifting with the tide. This is not the bustling port of a great city, but a small, unremarkable settlement tucked along Japan's coastline in the late Edo period. Here, life depends entirely on the sea's temperament. Some years bring abundant catches, others only disappointment. Your family, like most here, measures the seasons not by festivals or political events, but by the cycles of fish. Sardine runs in early spring, bonito in summer, and mackerel in autumn. You rise before the sun, mend nets in the pale light, and prepare bait with fingers numbed from the morning chill. The work is repetitive and quiet, yet every detail matters. A frayed knot left unattended might lose half a day's catch. A poorly salted fish might spoil before it can be sold in the nearby market. There is no glory in fishing, only the steady repetition of effort and the thin margin between survival and hunger. The village's social structure is simple but rigid. The headman records each household's output for the domains, taxes, and every family owes a portion of its catch. This is paid not in coins but in barrels of dried fish, neatly packed and inspected for quality before being sent inland to feed soldiers and city dwellers. You rarely see currency. Most trade here is in goods, whether rice from a farmer, firewood from the hillside, or sake from the brewer down the path. The exchange system is centuries old, and while it lacks the flexibility of money, it ensures no one in the village is entirely without what they need. Storms are the greatest threat, and they arrive without much warning. A single typhoon can destroy half the village's boats, leaving families scrambling to rebuild before the next fishing season. For this reason, every household keeps a small store of dried fish in the rafters, wrapped tightly in straw mats to ward off moisture. This reserve is never touched except in true hardship. It is not just food, it is security, a small shield against the unpredictable nature of the sea. Beyond the physical work, there is the quiet knowledge of the water itself. You can read the changing color of the waves, the movement of seabirds, and the smell of the wind. This knowledge is not written down, but passed from elder to apprentice, from parent to child, shaping the rhythm of life, generation after generation. You understand that the sea is not simply a source of livelihood, it is the center of the village's existence. Without it, this place would not survive. Yet, as the 19th century moves forward, change begins to seep in from the outside. Merchants from larger towns arrive more frequently, offering metal hooks, stronger rope, and most tempting of cash payments for large catches. Rumors spread of new fishing techniques and foreign ships seen far offshore. For now, these changes are distant, but they hint at a future where the village's slow, predictable life may not remain untouched. And in the quiet pre-dawn hours, as you mend another net, you cannot help but wonder, when that future comes, will the sea still provide in the same way it always has? The changes come slowly at first, almost imperceptible against the steady rhythm of the tide. A merchant begins visiting the village twice each month instead of once. His small coastal boat, carrying goods wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from salt spray. He brings not just fishing tools, but fabric dyed in colors richer than anything the villagers can make themselves. In exchange, he wants more fish, particularly the larger, oilier species that fetch higher prices in the towns. Some fishermen welcome the trade, eager to own stronger rope, new nets, or even a tin lantern that can withstand sea winds. Others are cautious, worried that the merchant's appetite for fish will push the village to overwork its waters. Still, the promise of cash is persuasive. For the first time, a few families keep small pouches of coins hidden in their homes. It changes how they think about their labor. Fish is no longer only for food or tax, it becomes a commodity with a shifting value. The headman keeps careful watch. Domain officials are not fond of commerce that escapes their notice, and he knows that too much trade with outsiders could bring unwanted scrutiny. Taxes are still due in dried fish, and the quota has not decreased, no matter how much the merchant offers. If a family diverts too much of its catch to the cash market, it risks punishment. The balance is delicate, requiring quiet agreements and unspoken understandings. Meanwhile, the sea begins to feel different. The older fishermen speak of currents that shift unpredictably and of certain shoals producing fewer sardines than before. Perhaps it is only the weather, they say, or perhaps the increasing number of boats on the water is taking its toll. Foreign vessels are sighted more often, now some flying unfamiliar flags, others appearing at dawn only to vanish by midday. They do not come close to the shore, but their presence is unsettling. One evening, after the day's work is done, the village gathers in the meeting house to discuss the future. It is rare for everyone to speak so openly. The elders argue for caution, reminding the younger men that the sea can punish greed with sudden storms or empty nets. The younger men argue for expansion, believing the merchant's trade could bring prosperity the village has never known. Voices rise and fall like waves, but no decision is reached. Through all of this, your own days remain much the same. You mend nets, you read the weather, and you pull in fish when the sea is kind. Yet you begin to notice how often conversations now turn to profit rather than survival. The word enough seems harder to define. You wonder if the village is moving toward something it does not yet understand, a point where the old ways and the new will collide, and the tide will not carry everyone safely to shore. And when that moment comes, Will those who have lived their lives by the quiet rhythm of the sea still recognize the village they once knew? The morning begins, as it always has, gray light, filtering through the paper shutters and the faint scent of damp earth and straw. The fields are heavy with late-season growth, and the village paths are lined with bundles of firewood stacked neatly against walls. Life still moves at the deliberate pace of the agricultural calendar, but there is a quiet sense that something beyond the control of the farmers is changing. Over the past months, the road beyond the village has grown busier. At first, it was just a few more travelers than usual, merchants leading pack horses, priests with small bundles, and peasants carrying sacks of rice for distant markets. But now, strangers appear more frequently, some dressed in fashions that suggest they have come from the larger castle towns. They ask questions about the harvest, about land ownership, about the nearby river crossing. They leave before nightfall, but their visits linger in the villagers' thoughts. One day, the tax collector arrives earlier than expected, his entourage larger, his demeanor more formal. He speaks of new record-keeping requirements and the need for more precise measurements of land and yield. The farmers listen politely, but when he leaves, the talk turns uneasy. More precise measurements, they know, often lead to more precise and heavy attacks. Some remember stories of villages in other domains losing portions of their land to powerful lords. When surveys revealed a discrepancy in ownership, yet daily tasks cannot wait for politics to settle. The fields demand attention, the irrigation ditches need clearing, and the storehouses must be inspected for pests before the grain is sealed for winter. These chores, repetitive and essential, have kept the community alive for generations. Even as the outside world begins to press in, the rhythm of work continues to hold everything together. There are whispers that the lord of the domain has been meeting with advisors about improving roads and encouraging trade. This could bring opportunities, new markets for surplus rice, and better access to goods the villagers rarely see. But it could also bring soldiers, officials, and outsiders with the authority to reshape the village's life without asking. Older residents recall the last time the road was widened. It brought prosperity for a short while, and then a flood of taxes that lasted much longer. As the season turns, you find yourself walking the boundary of your family's field, tracing the edges with your eyes as if memorizing them. The lines in the earth have been here longer than you, carved by the hands of ancestors who knew this land better than any map could show. You wonder if in the years to come, those lines will still mark the place where your family works, or if they will be redrawn by decisions made far from here by people who have never felt the soil under their nails. For now, the village waits. It waits for the winter frost, for the next survey, for word from the Lord's court. And in that waiting, there is both comfort and unease, a sense that time is holding its breath. The road beyond the village is still there, stretching toward places unseen. One day, it will carry change to your doorstep. The question is, when it arrives, will the village still belong to those who built it, or to those who claim it on paper? The first sound of the day is not the crowing of a rooster, but the slow, hollow thud of a wooden pestle against rice in a mortar. It comes from the neighbor's yard, a steady rhythm that blends into the faint hiss of wind through the cedar trees on the hill above the village. The sky is pale, streaked with the last thin clouds of night, and the air smells faintly of smoke from the embers left burning in the hearth overnight. You rise before the rest of the household, pulling on the same worn jacket you've used for years. Its sleeves are patched in two places, the color uneven from countless washings. The floorboards creak under your feet as you step outside. The ground is damp from a light rain that fell before dawn, and you can feel the moisture seep into the thin soles of your straw sandals. At the edge of the village, the fields stretch out in narrow strips separated by raised earthen ridges. The ridges are dotted with tufts of grass and the occasional stone set deliberately to mark a corner. Each strip belongs to a family, and each family knows exactly where their land ends and their neighbors begins. These lines are more than just divisions of soil. They are the boundaries of responsibility, the framework that has kept the village functioning for as long as anyone can remember. You pass the well, where two women are already drawing water. They greet you with a nod, their voices quiet so as not to wake those still sleeping. The bucket creaks against the rope as it rises, the water sloshing inside before being poured into a clay jar. The water is cold, pulled from deep underground, and its surface trembles in the morning breeze. Further along, an old man is mending a bamboo fence. His hands are slow but precise, weaving the thin strips into place with the ease of decades of practice. He pauses to adjust a knot, then pulls it tight with a small grunt of satisfaction. Such repairs seem small, but they are essential, keeping animals out of the vegetable patches and keeping the harvest safe from loss. Work in the fields begins early. Bent figures move between rows, stooping to pull weeds or check the water in the irrigation channels. The channels themselves are narrow trenches that snake through the fields, fed by a small river upstream. They are lined with stones in some places, bare earth in others, and require constant attention to prevent leaks. Every household contributes labor to maintain them, for without the channels, the fields would dry and the rice would fail. The tools are simple: a hoe, a sickle, a wooden rake butt. Each has its place and its season. The hoe turns the soil, breaking up clumps and mixing in compost. The sickle cuts weeds at their roots and is sharp enough to glide through the stems with minimal effort. The rake smooths the earth, leveling it before planting. None of these tools are new. Their handles are worn smooth from years of use, their blades kept sharp by hand with a whetstone. By mid-morning, the sun has risen high enough to warm the damp ground. The light catches on the shallow pools of water in the paddies, turning them into a patchwork of mirrored sky. You stop to drink from a small gourd flask, the water cool and slightly sweet from being stored overnight. A boy runs past, carrying a bundle of kindling, his bare feet splashing through a puddle without slowing. At the heart of the village, near the main road, stands the storehouse. Its thick plaster walls and raised wooden floor keep the rice safe from moisture and pests. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of straw. Large woven baskets are stacked in rows, each sealed with a tight lid. The storehouse is locked, and the key is kept by the headman, who is responsible for recording the amount of grain stored each year. This rice is the village's safety net, used to pay taxes, feed the community in poor harvests, and fulfill obligations to the local lord. The headman himself is a serious man in his late 50s, his back slightly bent from years of walking the fields. He spends much of his day in the small office attached to the storehouse, writing with a brush on narrow strips of paper. The ink is made fresh each morning by grinding a stick on an inkstone, mixed with just enough water to make it flow smoothly. His records are meticulous, each entry noting not only the amount of rice, but also the weather, the condition of the fields, and any disputes between neighbors over boundaries or water use. Just beyond the storehouse is the main road. It is not much more than a packed strip of earth, but it connects the village to the nearest market town. Merchants travel this road every few weeks, bringing cloth, tools, and salt. In exchange, they take away rice, vegetables, and sometimes handmade goods, such as baskets or straw sandals. The arrival of a merchant is always an event, drawing people from their work to see what news and goods he has brought. Today, however, the road is quiet. Only a single traveler passes by in the late morning priest in simple robes, carrying a small bundle and a staff. He stops at the shrine on the edge of the village, bows deeply, and leaves an offering of coins before continuing on his way. The shrine itself is small, barely more than a wooden structure with a thatched roof, but it is cared for with great respect. The villagers sweep its grounds regularly and replace the offering of rice and salt each week. As the sun reaches its height, work pauses. People gather in the shade of trees or in the cool interiors of their homes to eat the midday meal. It is simple, fair steamed rice, pickled vegetables, and perhaps a small piece of dried fish. Conversation drifts between talk of the weather, the condition of the irrigation channels, and rumors from the nearby towns. Someone mentions that the domain is considering a new tax based on the width of the roads, prompting a round of skeptical laughter. After the meal, the work resumes, slower now in the afternoon heat. The air is heavy with the scent of growing rice, mingled with the faint smell of wood smoke from cooking fires. The sound of cicadas fills the air, their constant high-pitched hum marking the long hours until evening. Shadows stretch slowly across the fields, and the hills in the distance take on a bluish haze. By late afternoon, the pace of work slows again. Tools are cleaned and stored, animals are fed, and water jars are refilled at the well. Children chase each other through the narrow lanes, their laughter echoing against the walls. Old women sit together on low stools, their hands busy with weaving straw into ropes or sandals. As dusk falls, the village takes on a quieter tone. Lanterns are lit in doorways, casting warm light onto the packed earth paths. The smell of miso soup and grilled fish drifts from kitchens. In the distance, a dog barks once, then is silent. The sky deepens from gold to blue, then to the soft gray of night. You sit on the veranda of your home, listening to the faint sounds of the village settling in for the evening. The day has been like so many others, filled with small, necessary tasks, the kind that keep the village alive without drawing notice. But as you watch the last light fade, you find yourself wondering how many more days will be like this. Change moves slowly in places like this, but it moves all the same. The question is, when it comes, will you recognize it before it is too late? The night is cool, and the air carries the faint scent of damp earth, mixed with the smoke from cooking fires, now reduced to glowing embers. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird calls once, then again, its voice clear in the stillness. The village sleeps early, but it does not sleep all at once. There are always a few lights still glowing, and a few soft conversations carried in low voices from behind paper screens. Inside your home, the small hearth has been banked for the night. A faint orange glow seeps through the layer of ash covering the coals, keeping just enough heat to rekindle the fire in the morning. You lie on your side on the tatami mat, your thin cotton blanket pulled up to your chin. The straw beneath the mat gives off its dry, grassy smell. It is familiar and, in its own way, comforting. Outside, the irrigation channel murmurs quietly, the water slipping past stones with a steady, tireless sound. This flow does not stop, day or night. Even when the fields do not need water, the channels carry it, a reminder that the rhythm of life here is tied to things far older than the village itself. The same channels were dug by hands now long gone, and their work still feeds the rice in the paddies today. At the edge of the settlement, a small patrol moves through the night. Two men with lanterns check the storehouse and the shrine. They do not expect trouble, but the duty is not taken lightly. A rat finding its way into the grain, or a sudden fire sparked by carelessness, could undo a year's work. The men speak quietly, stopping occasionally to listen. Their sandals make soft scraping sounds against the packed earth. Farther away, along the main road, there is a faint rumble of wheels perhaps, a late cart heading toward the town, or a messenger sent on some errand. The sound fades quickly, swallowed by the darkness. No one here hurries at night, unless there is urgent cause. Traveling after sunset carries risks, uneven roads, wild animals in the hills, and the possibility of meeting strangers whose intentions are unclear. The night deepens. The moon emerges from behind drifting clouds, casting pale light over the thatched rooftops. It picks out the edges of the fields, turning the water in the paddies into patches of silver. You hear the rustle of wind moving through the bamboo grove behind the houses. It is a soft, whispering sound, but once you notice it, you cannot unhear it. Somewhere nearby, a child stirs and begins to cry softly. A woman's voice soothes him, quiet but steady, and soon the sound fades. Life here is never completely still. There is always some reminder that you are not alone, that the whole village breathes together, even in sleep. Hours pass without you marking them. At some point, you drift into dreams, and by the time you wake, the sky is once again lightening toward dawn. The air is cooler than the day before, and the faint smell of rain hangs in it, though no drops have fallen yet. A cock crows, and from somewhere nearby comes the soft clack of a wooden door sliding open. The morning begins in the same way as it always does, small tasks repeated endlessly, each important in its own quiet way. You step outside and see an old woman already sweeping the dirt path in front of her home, her broom made from bound twigs. She moves slowly, but each stroke is even, and she works with the steady patience of someone who has done the same thing for decades. By the well, a young girl fills a bucket, the water splashing against the sides. She hoists it up with practiced ease, though it is nearly as heavy as she is. A thin line of water trails behind her as she carries it toward her family's house. She does not seem to notice it will soak into the ground before anyone can care. Work in the fields resumes quickly. The smell of damp earth rises as people walk the narrow ridges between paddies. Some are planting seedlings in neat rows, their hands moving with the precision of repetition. Others are adjusting the flow of water, lifting and replacing small wooden gates that divert the channels from one plot to another. These gates are simple, just boards fitted into grooves cut into the earth, but without them, the careful balance of water would be lost. You join the work, your sandals sinking slightly into the wet soil. The sun climbs slowly, bringing with it the first warmth of the day. Birds call from the hedges, darting from one side of the fields to the other in quick, nervous flights. Now and then, you catch the distant sound of a cart on the road, but it is faint, barely more than a suggestion. By mid-morning, the headman appears at the edge of the fields, his hands clasped behind his back. He watches for a while, not speaking, then moves on toward the storehouse. His presence is not unwelcome. He is respected, but it serves as a reminder that the village's obligations are never far from mind. Taxes will be due in a few months, and the harvest must be good enough to meet them. The clouds begin to thicken, softening the sunlight. A breeze carries the smell of pine from the hills, and the sound of the irrigation water becomes more pronounced. The work continues at the same steady pace it has kept for generations, and yet you cannot help but wonder if some change might one day alter this rhythm. For now, though, the only certainty is the day's labor, the fields stretching out before you, and the slow passage of time that governs all things here. The rain begins before dawn, soft at first, the drops tapping lightly against the roof in a rhythm that feels older than memory. You wake to the sound, unsure at first if it is real or part of some fading dream. The air inside the house is cool, with a dampness that seeps into your clothes and skin. Somewhere in the darkness, a shutter rattles faintly, loosened by last season's windstorms, but never quite repaired. You sit up slowly, listening. The village is quieter than usual. On most mornings, the first sounds come before the light footsteps on the path, the creak of a well's pulley, and the scrape of a broom against packed earth. But the rain delays everything. People wait inside, moving more slowly, knowing that the day's work will be wet and heavy. By the time you slide open the door, the sky is a pale, unbroken gray. The air smells of wet earth and green leaves. Water runs in thin streams along the edges of the paths, carrying with it small bits of straw and fallen petals from the plum trees. The fields beyond the houses glisten under a veil of mist, each paddy's surface broken only by the rings where raindrops strike. A neighbor passes by, a straw cape hanging from his shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat dripping at the edges. He nods without speaking. Words seem unnecessary in this weather. His sandals leave dark, wet prints that fade as the rain washes over them. At the well, a young boy struggles with the rope, his hands slick on the wet hemp fibers. The bucket sways and spins as he hauls it up, water sloshing over the sides. When he sees you watching, he straightens his back as though to prove his strength, then carries the load toward his home with careful steps. The rain makes every sound sharper. A dog barking at the edge of the village echoes longer than it would on a dry day. The rhythmic thump of a pestle in a mortar carries from somewhere nearby. Someone is pounding rice into cakes, the wet air keeping the grains soft. From far off, you hear the faint, metallic clink of a hammer on metal. The blacksmith's forge is one of the few places that never pauses for weather. By mid-morning, work in the fields resumes despite the rain. Men and women move through the paddies in slow, deliberate lines, planting seedlings or weeding between the rows. Their straw hats tilt low, hiding their faces from the drizzle, and their clothes are soaked dark. The mud grips at their feet with every step, but no one complains. Rice will not wait for a sunny day. The headman appears again, this time walking the path that runs between the storehouse and the shrine. His umbrella is made of oiled paper, the drops sliding off in smooth beads. He stops to speak with an elder, their voices low and indistinct over the rain. Whatever is said, they part with a short bow and continue in opposite directions. As the day passes, the clouds shift, breaking in places to reveal thin shafts of sunlight that turn the wet leaves to bright silver. The rain eases. The water still drips from the eaves long after the last drops have fallen. In the distance, the hills appear sharper against the sky, their slopes dark with fresh moisture. By late afternoon, the paths are busy again. Children splash in shallow puddles, their laughter quick and bright. Women carry baskets of washed greens from the fields. Smoke rises from kitchen fires, curling upward into the clearing air. The smell of cooking miso, roasted barley, stewed vegetables mixes with the scent of rain on the ground. Evening comes slowly. The damp air cools quickly, and people begin to move indoors, shaking rain from their clothes before stepping over the threshold. Lanterns are lit one by one, their glow turning the wet streets into a patchwork of warm, wavering light. Somewhere, a shamisen plays a soft, wandering tune, barely audible over the steady trickle of water still running through the drainage channels. The day ends much as it began, quietly, without ceremony. The fields will be just as wet tomorrow, the work just as demanding, and the meals just as simple. Nothing changes quickly here, and perhaps that is why it endures each day, folded into the next, like the endless ripples on the surface of a rain-fed paddy, moving outward but never breaking the pattern.